Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Russia is not nearly having the success for their summer campaign that they were hoping for. They still, however, are advancing at the front line, except for certain directions where we see Ukrainians are actually performing quite well. So let's look into it and understand what is happening at the front lines, because remember, everything that is surrounding this war is still dependent on what is the situation at the front line and how well Ukraine is holding. And a very quick reminder that despite the fact that Russia is advancing, this is just the nature of the attrition warfare, that the country with bigger resources and bigger availability of those resources to be sacrificed is going to be advancing. Ukrainians are trying to preserve their resource and attrit the Russians advancing, inflicting as much damage as they possibly can, trading land for bodies, so to say. And that's why, despite the fact that Russia is taking the territory, overall, we only need to follow if there is any certain breakthroughs on the front line, which there are not any, and we're going to cover today what exactly happens when those breakthroughs appear. Firstly, let's tackle a couple of headlines that appeared in the media in the last couple of days. All of them boil down to the fact that Russia is supposedly preparing 110,000 force that is going to attack Ukraine and take over all of the unoccupied land and absolutely going to crush Ukrainian military, with a variation of how dramatic they make it sound. In reality, this 110,000 people that is being mentioned, that is not a new force. That is not additional 110,000. That is just force that Russia just pulled from all of the secondary directions when they could, to try to focus more on something that around Pokrovsk. We're going to cover in details why. But the media is portraying it like there is going to be some kind of a huge change happening at the front line with Russian wave just crushing the Ukrainians, which is absolutely not what is going to happen. We're just going to see Russia potentially giving up on certain secondary directions like around North and Sumy and Kharkiv, and moving those troops to the front line in Donetsk. But this obviously will mean that Ukrainians are going to do the same. So no, this will not change the situation significantly. And then the second headline is the Russian breakthrough around the southern part of Donetsk, which is located right over here, where my main points, as I already explained many times on this channel, is that generally speaking, in the southern area of Ukraine, there is not much narratively strategical objectives that can define this war in any kind. It is still important to defend, and Ukrainians are doing their work to defend it, but I'm just saying that Russia is advancing because Russia is advancing. And there's going to be some issues for them here. Their targets are very clear. They want to get towards this area right over here where the rivers are kind of converging. And this will allow Russia essentially to overcome crossing of these rivers and allow them to locally start exerting some level of dominance. So we might see Russians slow down here around the forest and also in this area where those rivers are. So right now they are just moving to create this tip. But let's go to something that is absolute tale of caution for Russian forces and for pretty much everyone that is involved in following this warfare. So, situation around Pokrovsk, and the situation is developing in a very, very curious way. We remember the premise. Russia attacked towards the north of Pokrovsk, then they had sudden success towards the northern part from their main advance routes, which they want to go this way, but they actually went towards the north and had some success. And since then, they were scrambling additional forces to this area to try to exploit this breakthrough. But the nature of war is very different now, and this turns to a complete disastrous cautionary tale for Russians already. Let's look in details because this is fascinating. So as Russians started getting more people into this pocket to both support the pressure towards the main direction that they want to get to this area, so they complete the semi-encirclement of over Pokrovsk, But also they need additional forces now if they want to continue securing this area north where Ukrainians are having. So this caused a major accumulation of forces in this area right over here, which in turn detracted from Russian pressure towards the main city of Pokrovsk. And this led to Russia now calling in troops from other direction to help them sustain the effort. The problem with that is what happens if Ukrainians send enough competent force and start counterattacking? Because while you are applying pressure and you're creating trouble for Ukrainians, you're also somewhat exposing yourself because this area is not secured, because you have advanced a little bit forward and now they're having trouble because here is a concentration of forces and Ukrainians are actually putting pressure on Russia. They're putting pressure on Russia in this area and this area. And additionally, they're putting additional counterattacks in this area and in this area. The plan of Ukrainians is very clear. There is a small cutoff and there is a potential big cutoff that they want to make. And they're having some success. So now Russians are having a little bit of a pressure here, and they're also having a pressure here. This already is a bad place to be in because there is no clear roads for you to get across. So now Russians essentially need to walk across the fields where Ukrainian drones are cutting them off. And while the density of Russians here is still pretty high, because they do want to continue pressure and they do need to kind of move up towards north to secure this. Because, I mean, the Russian command structure is like this, that if you showed yourself somewhere to be, if you filmed a propaganda video with the flag, then you need to make sure that situation on the ground starts corresponding to that reality reported to the higher ups. Because Russian modus operandi is, if we're already there, then we will never go back. And we will do everything that we can to make sure that we make that dream a reality. And now Russia is just pouring in more and more and more and more resources to this already seemingly failing situation. It probably can still be salvaged. Like, there is not still a critical situation, yet Ukrainian advances are becoming really, really bad. This is turning to be from a Russian success that could potentially define the front line to now potentially being a complete disaster for Russians happening in this area. This is turning to be a massive kill box that Russian command is basically using as a let's do everything that we can just to try to secure it, despite the fact that it's absolutely atrocious. It's a cautionary tale for overextensions, and Russians tried to undercut Ukrainian efforts by sending in additional reinforcements from the northern direction from Sumy. They've redeployed additional brigades, and these brigades now have been sent in this area, and they've actually were sent specifically on armored columns to try to undercut Ukrainian advances towards the north, to move through the city of Novoekonomichne, and this turned in a complete disaster. We saw pictures you will probably see on your screen right now with Russian columns of vehicles just completely being burned down to the ground with these attacks. And Ukrainians have been conducting counterattacks in this area to prevent any kind of undercutting of their efforts, specifically towards the southern part of Novoekonomichne and so on. This is not going well for Russia at all, and they're pouring efforts on this failing offensive, and Ukrainians are showing a masterclass here of completely dismantling Russian forces. And I mean, it is still a little bit of a, I don't want to say 50-50 because we saw the shift already towards the Ukrainian side, but it's pretty crazy how disastrously this is developing for Russians. But also in the other parts of Pokrovsk, there is additional activities happening. Russia tries to move away because they are sending more troops to their direction, and they want to pressure other directions to force Ukraine to separate some of their forces, but they're not having big success. The main goal of Ukrainians is to prevent Russians reaching this highway over here. So Ukrainians are counterattacking in directions towards the south, and Russia is trying to attack towards directions to the north. So on this area here right now, there is basically mutually conducting battles of offensives in both directions. We don't know where it's going to sway, but this creates this weird balance so far in this area, and Russians are not advancing despite the fact that obviously there are some propagandists claiming that there is already fighting happening in the Pokrovsk outskirts, but this is nothing, to be honest. This is just gray area. But let's move up north, where Ukraine is having certain issues, and those issues are happening because Ukraine is having success of Pokrovsk. When the Russian attack on Pokrovsk appeared, this breakthrough, I already stated that Ukrainians will be using resources they could have used somewhere else, and this will cost Ukraine certain things. And now we see that cost being developed. Around Lyman area, Ukrainians are still holding the key line here, which is Drobyshevo, Lyman, Yampil. More than that, Russians trying to advance towards this area, and they're having success. And mostly we need to look at this part over here, whether or not Russians will be able to advance quickly, or Ukrainians will be able to stop them around Drobyshevo. I am stating they could be able to stop it because recently there have been reports about the Zarychne village. As you can see on Deep State map, Zarychne is still colored somewhat red. Yet recently we got notifications from Ukrainians that they've entered the settlement and they actually cleared it up again. So Ukrainians are conducting operations to help stabilize this positions over here, and so far nothing critical happened. The situation is favoring Russia, specifically because Ukrainians were pulling some of the troops from the area, but there is now additional forces dedicated, and there are activities happening to help stabilize the situation. Around Kupiansk in the north, the Russian breakthrough that was undercut over here, it is now a little bit more difficult, the situation. Russians here are attacking towards the northern sides of Kupiansk. There are no semi-encirclement of the city, so the situation is not critical as a lot of people trying to paint it. And a lot of the Russian positions filmed in this area, as I explained before, is just propaganda videos. However, there is fighting north of Kupiansk, and effectively this crossing around the city is all but controlled by the Russian drones. So this is not really a good sustainable positions, and we already are hearing that Ukrainians in Sinkivka are having certain issues. Additionally, in the last couple of days, Ukrainians have been pulling out from certain frontline directions in this pocket. So I do believe that Ukrainians are treating the situation developing north of Kupiansk with the respect that it deserves, that it will definitely create issues for Ukrainians. But remember, there's going to be additional crossings in the area established across the rivers, so there are options for Ukrainians to fall back. My biggest trouble was obviously if there is some kind of a fast breakthrough and then suddenly Kupiansk get overtaken and then Russians are able to advance south over this highway and cut off a lot of the Ukrainian ability of crossing this Oskil River over here. Yet now we see that Ukrainians are doing it in a proper fashion, so nothing is collapsing. Ukrainians are tackling this difficult situation with the necessary control and respect that it deserves. So the situation on the front line is very dynamic. Ukrainian armed forces, again, brought me to my knees and made sure that I pay respects and continue repeating that we all should trust the Ukrainian armed forces, and even the breakthrough that I said would cause a lot of issues for Ukrainians, and it's still causing, like you've seen, Russia is advancing in some of the northern areas. But most important part is that Ukrainians are successfully counterattacking. They are causing major issues for Russians. Russia is trying to regroup, send in more forces, but it was not going well for them. The summer campaign was pretty bad. They achieved almost nothing. You can watch my video discussing that. Ukrainians are also noting that the reform happening during August, moving from the brigade-focused command to now corps-focused command, is progressing steadily. And I can definitely see it happening on the front line. There's a lot better coordination between units, better coordination between the bigger forces in this campaign. So I'm seeing positive effects already on the front line. And as there's going to be more and more adaptation to the new system, we're going to see improvements in how Ukrainians are performing. It is all great news to hear, and I'm looking forward to see what's going to happen in the autumn to winter campaigns. Ukrainians are fighting. Ukrainians doing great job. Let's continue supporting them. Trust in Ukrainian armed forces. They've proven it time and time again, and this time as well. I love you. Slava Ukraini, and I will see you next time.